Hi, I'm Megan Brown, teacher and EdTech enthusiast. Thanks for joining me on this journey to learn and share meaningful ways to integrate technology into everyday lessons. So, you want to teach with technology? Let's get started. Hello, fellow educators. Welcome to today's episode, So You're Tired of Using Worksheets. Today, we're going to look at different ways to revamp your favorite worksheets using the SAMR model. So, I want you to think about your favorite worksheet that you have ever used with your students. What makes that worksheet so great? Now, think about the worst worksheet. Maybe you saw it in a textbook and told yourself you would never touch it with a 6-foot pole. Do you have your worksheets in mind? Great. As you are listening, I want you to think about how you can use the SAMR model to transform your favorite worksheet into an online activity, and how you can revamp some of those awful worksheets that we've all seen into something spectacular and engaging for students. So before we go into different strategies to renovate our worksheets, let's break down what the SAMR model is. So SAMR is spelled SAMR, and it stands for Substitution, Augmentation, Modification, and Redefinition. This framework explains 4 different approaches to integrating technology into the classroom. Each strategy is unique, and it has its own benefits and challenges. Substitution is when you directly replace a physical activity and instead use technology. But there is no functional change from using technology. Augmentation is similar, where you're still substituting something physical with an online activity, but now there's some functional improvements that only happen because of technology. Modification is when an activity is significantly redesigned using technological features, so it no longer looks like the same activity. Finally, redefinition is when the task is completely redesigned and the new task would not even be conceivable without the aid of technology. So now let's look at how we can use worksheets as the basis for activities at each of these 4 categories. Remember those worksheets you thought of a minute ago? Don't forget them. And just a quick side note. This framework gives 4 different strategies to integrate technology. Each one has a place in its classroom, so don't feel like you have to strive to take every activity to the redefinition level. Having a mix between categories will create a well-balanced classroom. A lot of times this model is looked at like a ladder to strive up to redefinition, but it's your job to determine how and when to use each strategy. My goal here is not to prescribe you with what exactly you should do in your classroom to use one of these strategies to really revamp one of your worksheets. My goal is to get you thinking about what you love to do, to figure out a way that works for you, to add a little creativity to your classroom if you notice that you are using worksheets on a daily basis. So as we're going, think about what works for you and how you can use substitution, augmentation, modification, or redefinition to make something work really well in your classroom. I have brainstormed 4 different possible worksheets you might use, and we're going to use this throughout the podcast to look at different ways we can replace these worksheets using the SAMR model. So for math, you might use a worksheet that has practice problems. I know on Teachers Pay Teachers, I've gotten a lot of worksheets that look like a maze. So when you find the right answer, it takes you to the next problem, and that will bring you all the way through the maze. In science, a lot of times we'll have worksheets for lab reports, so students will fill in their hypothesis, observations, and write their conclusions all in one place. In social studies, a lot of the times, we'll use maps or other visuals to analyze and answer questions. So I've used some of these worksheets that have a map of the United States, and then students have to use that map to answer questions. And finally, in ELA, a common topic is finding theme. So maybe there's a worksheet where you have to find the theme of different stories. So these are some possible worksheets you might see, but make sure that you're keeping the worksheets that you use in mind as we are brainstorming different ways to replace these worksheets with online tools. So let's start with substitution. Remember, substitution is where you are directly replacing a worksheet with online practice, but there is no change in how it functions. So you're doing essentially the exact same thing, you're just using something online instead of something on paper. So this might look like in math, take that worksheet with practice problems. What you could do is upload it as a PDF. So it's literally the exact same worksheet. And then you can use the Kami Google extension. This allows you to write on worksheets. So students can just use that Kami extension to fill out their worksheet and turn it in on whatever learning management system you're using. Now, to use substitution on that lab report for science, you could have the exact same lab report on a Google Doc so that students can enter their answers in the Google document instead of writing it on paper. For social studies, you could create a Google form or just an online quiz where you upload a picture of the map and then below have the questions where students answer. For language arts, you could create an online quiz that has a paragraph of the story they're analyzing, and then they have to type in the theme. So you could use this on your learning management system, or you could even make a Google form that has the paragraph and then have students type in the theme. Substitution is really useful because first off, it gets students familiar with using technology and it eliminates paper. I know a lot of people right now are trying to limit their use of paper because you can pass a lot of germs around when you're just passing out papers and then collecting them. So using technology eliminates all those germs. Also, you might just have a really awesome worksheet that has a lot of great information and you don't want to change it up too much because it's a really great worksheet. Using substitution can be incredibly valuable, so never feel guilty if you're using a lesson that has substitution. It's a really great place to start, especially if you yourself are still getting used to using technology in the classroom. Now let's look at augmentation. So remember, this is where the assignment is essentially the same, but now that you're including technology, it's going to have some functional improvements or different features. But the task the students are doing is not changing. So let's look at those 4 possible worksheets again and see how we can use augmentation to turn them into an online activity. So for math, let's take those practice problems and we're going to use a Google form that's going to have embedded feedback so that students can see in real time if they get a question right or wrong and what mistake they're probably making. Or we could create an escape room on Google Forms so that it's a more interesting way of doing practice problems. For science, we can still have students typing their lab report on a Google document, but now we can have them take pictures on their Chromebook or with their iPad and upload those pictures to go along with their observations. Then students can share their lab reports with you or with their peers so that they can have feedback in real time. In social studies, instead of having students use a picture of a map, have them get on Google Maps and answer the questions, or you might be able to find an interactive map online. Lastly, for language arts, instead of having snippets of stories, you could have a Google slide that has text. It could have videos, pictures, songs. The Google slide can incorporate all this different media, and then you can have students determine the theme. So instead of just having text and stories, they have all these different media that they can analyze for theme. So augmentation is a great way to incorporate technology when you have a tried and true worksheet, but maybe you want to give it a little flair. Students are doing the same tasks, but now there's something a little bit extra, maybe a little bit more functional for either you or your students. Now let's talk about modification. So here, the tasks students are doing are going to start to look a little bit different. We are reworking that assignment using technology, so there are some significant differences, and the task is redesigned. So let's start with math. Instead of having students solve problem after problem after problem, students can use Seesaw or Flipgrid to create a video where they are recording themselves solving and explaining a problem step by step. So this looks very different than having students complete problem after problem on a worksheet. For science, instead of having students type out a lab report, whether they write it on a piece of paper or they type it on a Google document, we can use modification. So maybe now they're creating a podcast. They're explaining their findings. They're describing what they observed. They're sharing their conclusions and using that data to support their conclusions. All this instead of writing, though, now they're creating a podcast. In social studies, we could take that worksheet and instead create a virtual tour on Google Maps. So students can go from state to state and read the information that you have linked. You could also include links to a quizzes, maybe a GIM kit, and have students answer questions there. Lastly, language arts. Students can create their own stories or videos and upload them to an online discussion board. There, students can comment on each other's posts, explaining what they think the theme is, and giving each other feedback. So this is a different kind of activity than having students read a story and identify the theme. Now they're creating their own stories and having discussions. Using modification is going to be really helpful to take a worksheet that's maybe a little bit simpler and change it so now it's a little bit more meaningful, or it's taking the activity to a different level that's going to require a little bit higher level of thinking. Last but not least is redefinition. Here, our original task is going to be something completely new, and it's similar to modification, but the difference is with redefinition, what you're doing would not be conceivable without the aid of technology. Let's take a look at math. So for modification, we talked about students recording themselves going step by step through a problem. But for redefinition, we can take this one step further. Instead of having them do this on Seesaw or Flipgrid, have them upload it to YouTube where they can get feedback from real people who are using their work. You can also create playlists so that students have a record of everything that they're learning through the year. Next is science. So for modification, we talked about students making a podcast. To turn this into a redefinition level assignment, students can publish it to Apple Podcast and have an authentic audience listen to their podcast and give them feedback. For social studies, instead of having students go through a virtual tour, have students create one themselves where they're adding pictures, adding videos. They are explaining the information instead of reading it. And last is language arts. Instead of having a discussion board where students are sharing their stories, make it a published blog. Students can write personal narratives and discuss what they learned from these experiences and how that relates to theme. Having this real-world audience where other people can read and comment on their work would not be possible without technology. It wouldn't be possible to get that information out to an authentic audience. Now, these assignments are time-consuming, so I would not strive to use redefinition every day in your classroom. But it is a nice way to really give students a purpose for what they're learning. There are a lot of reasons you might want to use redefinition in your classroom. If you notice that there's a topic that students just have a really low motivation for, or you do an activity where maybe students aren't quite giving their best effort, or they're not making a quality product that you know they're capable of, having that authentic audience will really bring that out of them. It will help motivate them to do their best and create something that's quality because there's going to be real people listening to it, watching it, using it in some way. Another thing that you can use redefinition activities for is as an extension if some students are ahead. It will give them a really meaningful, authentic task to use what they've learned already. Now that we've taken a look at the 4 different strategies using the SAMR model, I want you to think about how you are using technology right now. Then make a realistic goal of where you would like to be, maybe by the end of this month or the end of the school year. Are you mostly using Substitution right now? If so, that's great. Try and think of some ways to maybe include more modification into your classroom every once in a while. Are you already pretty comfortable with augmentation and modification? Well, then it could be time to try something redefining and see how it goes. Remember that worksheet that we've been thinking about? How can it be reconstructed to meet this goal? Once you have your idea, I would love to hear about it on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. And once you try it in your classroom, let us know how it goes in the 2 Teach with Tech community. Let us know on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at the number 2 Teach with Tech. I am so excited to see how you all redefine your worksheets. I cannot believe that we only have 2 episodes left in this first season. Next episode, we're going to look at ways to gamify the classroom. I am so excited about this episode because I'm actually taking an educational game design class right now, and I can't wait to share what I have learned with you. If you have any specific questions that you want addressed, or you want to share how you've gamified your classroom, please email me at the number 2 teachwithtech@gmail.com. I also have an announcement. All of our episodes are now available to listen to on YouTube. So make sure to tell your friends and colleagues. And if you're loving this podcast, a review would be extremely helpful to get the word out. I can't wait to chat with you next time. But until then, remember what George Couros said, technology will never replace teachers. But in the hands of great teachers, it's transformational.